Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. This is session 11 of MOOC 9, Digital Currencies and Innovation. And in this module, in this session, we really focus on some of the general principles of innovation, because these are useful principles to have in the back of one's mind as a framework. And these are topics that then you can often apply in areas that have a lot of innovation, a lot of startups, which is obviously highly relevant to the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. So we have a variety of questions from the audience. So I will go through those, and then we'll see if there's more things to do in the chat. I will make a very personal note. I just saw someone in the chat that said hello from San Diego. I was in San Diego a few days ago. So hello from Cyprus, but hello also San Diego. It was very beautiful and very lovely. So let's start with the most straightforward and basic question. Where might we be in the adoption curve of cryptocurrencies? Early adopters stage. And so for this question, I'm going to pull out actually the chart we have about adoption curves. And this was in our material. And the adoption curve, and it's of course a simplification like all frameworks. They're never exactly right, but they are useful simplifications and frameworks in order to guide decision-making and think about what comes next. And so the adoption curve is a curve that is commonly used with technologies to think through how far along they are in diffusing through the population, and what are the likely challenges at each stage, and what might be coming next. So the curve is split into 5 different buckets: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. And below, there are percentages, and again, these aren't set in stone, but they are, I think, reasonably accurate, of how many people might be in each bucket. So innovators are about 2.5%, early adopters 13.5%, early majority a third, late majority a third, and laggards 16%. And I'll describe the two most, I'll actually read what we say about the two most relevant groups to this question. Innovators seek new ideas, can cope with uncertainty and increased risk. Excuse me. Broader perspectives. Early adopters, more localized and less global perspective. Their opinion is more respected than innovators. Often leaders tend to back winners. So let's think about, with that framework, what might that mean? Well, I have seen statistics that say that cryptocurrency penetration is in the 2-3% range. That would mean in the United States, if it was 3%, 12 million people. If you applied it globally, well, 7 billion people times 3% would be 210 million. It's certainly not accurate globally, because, I mean, there are still several billion people in the world who do not have access to internet, let alone cryptocurrency. If you applied it to the developed world, maybe you're talking about a billion-ish people there. That would be 30 million. If you think about some of the large countries in the developing world, that would be another 30, 50 million. I think it's fair to say that it's in that range, right? Like, so if we look at this numerically, is it closer to being 12 million Americans, or 14% would be 50 million Americans? 14% on a global perspective would be hundreds of millions of people. That's early adopter stage. I think on a pure numerical basis, we are much closer to innovators than early adopters. That's the quantitative. Let's look at it qualitatively. Innovators seek new ideas, can cope with uncertainty and increased risk, broader perspectives. Early adopters, more localized, more respected, often leaders, tend to back winners. Qualitatively, I think we are still, again, in the innovators phase. Despite, so I've been teaching this course for 4 years now, I still read vast amount of mainstream material about cryptocurrency that talks about risk. So it has certainly not passed from the stage where people say, no, it's past the risky phase. We're all comfortable with it. It's a clear winner from here on out. It's a logical, sensible thing to do. So on a qualitative basis, I think, again, we are innovators, not early adopters. And so if I had to pick one, that's what I would pick. Now, having said that, on both the quantitative and the qualitative basis, I think we are on the margin between innovators and early adopters. So there are certainly sub-pockets of the world where we've crossed over. Like, if we were in San Francisco, we're clearly in early adopters phase, not innovators phase. If we are in South Korea, we're in early adopters phase, not innovators phase. But if we're looking at, kind of big chunks of the world as a whole, I think we've more or less filled up the innovators bucket, and we're close to moving to the early adopters bucket. And so this is what I would say for kind of cryptocurrency as a whole. Now, I suspect it's the same person. I have another question. It says, where might we be in the adoption curve for blockchain? Innovators stage? So this is very interesting because blockchain adoption is very hard to measure, and I think it's actually very limited. And so what I mean, blockchain as distinct from cryptocurrencies, right? So, or another way to say it, as distinct from public cryptocurrencies. Or another way to say it, private blockchains. Another way to say it, B2B blockchains, because almost by definition, consumers are not engaging in private blockchains, right? When you see announcement of the style, Maersk and IBM are doing a private blockchain to help supply chain around the world, they're not going to ask Antonis Polemitis to track anything of his own on that blockchain. That's going to be an enterprise solution with big companies involved. We are absolutely, definitely 110% in the innovators stage on blockchain and early in the innovators stage on blockchain. There is no chance, no way, no how that 2.5% of companies or governments have working blockchain systems in production. I suspect the number of working blockchain systems in actual production, delivering kind of a core product and service of a company, are in the handfuls worldwide. Right? There's a lot of chatter about blockchains. There's a lot of committees set up at companies to look at blockchains. There's a lot of innovation groups. There's a lot of trials. There's a lot of alpha testing. There's a lot of consultants selling blockchain projects. All of this is happening, but mostly they are not active, the systems. Mostly they're not used in production. And even if every single trial we've heard of goes into production, you're still talking about a fraction of 1% of companies in the world using a blockchain for anything. So we are very much in innovator phase for blockchain as distinct from cryptocurrencies, and much further along in cryptocurrencies. And it's funny because for many, many years, at least since 2014, the mantra was, yeah, we don't like Bitcoin or we don't like cryptocurrencies, but we like the technology behind it, the blockchain technology. And on any metric you want to look at, usage, number of users, activity, economic value flowing through it, the cryptocurrencies, the public blockchains, are vastly ahead of the private blockchains and the enterprise solutions and the permission blockchains. And so it's pretty interesting to think about that, even though all these serious people have been saying for a very long time that it's the private stuff that's interesting. And I think what you're seeing in this case is the power of a permissionless system, because private blockchain is like implementing any other IT project, right? And not any other IT project, any other complicated consortium-based IT project that requires a lot of people to coordinate on something. On a public, not permissioned blockchain, anyone can come in. It's permissionless, and you're seeing people do things, and that's the power of a permissionless system. That even though it was not viewed as the important one, or serious people said it was an important one. Obviously, the folks involved in cryptocurrency thought the public ones were more important. The fact that people can just get in there and start doing things means that more things have happened. So I think that's my answer on 2 and 3. We have 2. No, I think they're different questions. What is the most disruptive part of cryptocurrencies? Decentralization? Good question. I think it's 2 topics together that are related but different. And to me, the most interesting things about cryptocurrencies are their permissionlessness and their censorship resistance, which are related but different, and we'll discuss that, and both of which are qualities that emerge from them being decentralized. So as a short answer to the question, I think yes, the decentralization of transactions, right? So a useful framework to think about cryptocurrency is the same way that the internet and TCP/IP decentralized information provisioning. Cryptocurrency has decentralized various forms of transactions. And this is a very, very big deal. This is the central breakthrough with cryptocurrency, because we are surrounded by transaction systems. We are surrounded by ledgers. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of them that help every city, every town, every country operate. And they are all 100% of them centralized pre-cryptocurrency. We had no other system. If you said, who can authorize money to move from one bank account to the other? who can register a student at the University of Nicosia, who can book a hotel room at Starwood, the new Starwood Hotel, who can check if you're eligible to vote in Nicosia, and so on and so on. All of these rely on a centralized ledger. All of them rely on a centralized record keeper of the ledger, a trusted third party, someone who is responsible for the ledger's integrity. And now we have a system. We have a system that allows us to execute these types of transaction systems without a central party in the middle. That's a big deal. This is a huge deal. This is what we understood in 2013 at the University of Nicosia and said, wow, this is not a question about, is the price of Bitcoin high or low today? Is a certain Bitcoin business allowed or not allowed? This is about a breakthrough that is going to allow hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of different systems to operate in a different manner and operate without a trusted third party, operate without a centralized record keeper. And so once you have that, a couple of properties emerge. And let's talk about these properties because they're related, because they emerge from the same underlying breakthrough, but they're different. First property is permissionlessness. Permissionless. The permissionless system, so the property is permissionlessness. And what that means is you have a network, and you do not have to apply to someone to give you access to that network. That's unheard of, obviously, for transaction networks, right? If I wanted to send wire transfers in the banking system, in order to get access to the banking system, I would need to have an account with a bank, and getting an account with the bank would involve some type of application process where I could be approved or rejected. But in any case, it is permission. Someone had to let me in. With a public cryptocurrency, that is not the case. I can download a Bitcoin wallet or a Bitcoin full node or the equivalent in any number of public cryptocurrencies and start interacting with that network. And I don't have to submit an application to anyone. There is no one who can block me. There is no one in charge. And that doesn't matter if I am in Cyprus or in Georgia or in Iceland or in Zimbabwe or Qatar or the Netherlands or in Brazil, I was reading through our chat, or in Zurich. It doesn't matter if I'm young, old. It doesn't matter if I'm human. Right? It was the old New Yorker cartoon, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, and the running joke on the blockchain, nobody knows you're a fridge, right? It's true. You can register machines onto this network. You can enter just a piece of software, and you're on the network. And so that is important in and of itself. It means participants can come on, and there's no vetting process. And so you know, it sounds scary to people, right? Like, oh, well, gosh, if there's no vetting process, all types of strange things can come on. But on the whole, when there are vetting processes, things tend to be very conservative and slow moving, and a lot of people are pushed out, and a lot of innovation is pushed out. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is censorship resistance. This is the next stage, in a way, which means a certain transaction cannot be blocked. And so let me see how this is different, right? Like, permissionless means Antonis Polemitis can log onto the system. Censorship resistance means nobody can stop Antonis Polemitis from sending one Bitcoin from wallet X to wallet Y. That's also interesting because it gives a freedom of action that you don't have in permissioned systems, and it's also a perfect analogy to the internet. why was the internet designed to be censorship resistant? You know, the old story of the DARPANET and why it was built the way it was built. It was built to survive a nuclear attack on the United States. It was built to not have a central gateway through which things pass. And it was therefore built to be censorship resistant. In that case, the censorship being a nuclear attack. So if you had a US-wide telecommunications network, and you knew that all the telecommunications went through this hub, and then you destroyed that hub, then the network's out of commission. The internet had no fixed path for one piece of information to get from its starting point to its destination. And so if any particular node is out of commission, it goes through other nodes. I have seen this in practice in a little bit of a scary context. I was in my office in New York on 9/11 and watched the planes go by and the towers fall. And obviously it was very dramatic. And obviously I wanted to call my family. And I picked up the phone. I picked up the hard line, the fixed phone, my desk phone, and there was no dial tone. The phone systems didn't work. And that was a combination of the fact a lot of people were trying to make a call, and certain hubs in downtown New York were destroyed in 9/11. So the phone system, not just the mobile system, which was obviously also not working because it was overloaded, but even the fixed line system that you take as being very reliable was out of commission. And so I was trying to think how I was going to tell my family that I was okay. And this was still early-ish, right? 2001. I sent an email. It was interesting. The email was very slow. The internet was very slow. But the email got through. Even though it ran through many of the same networks as the phone companies, it actually got through. So it found a pathway off the island of Manhattan and managed to get to my family then in Virginia and in Cyprus and various other places. So in a real life form of censorship attack, there was the internet did route around it, and the more centralized fixed line systems did not. So this is, for me, the whole theory here. Why this is interesting, why we're running this program, why I love this topic area, why I think we have decades ahead of us of interesting developments, is the combination of permissionlessness and censorship resistance that comes from decentralization. Now, are there other interesting features of blockchains that might be nice? Sure. Like, even if you had a permission blockchain among trusted parties, an enterprise consortium for X, is it theoretically a system that might synchronize better and more reliably than someone having a central database? Yes, I think that's true. But that is not a disruptive innovation, right? Like, there's a running joke about a lot of things that if you said, yeah, I'm doing this server or data center IT project, we're all going to figure out a better way to synchronize our databases, everyone's going to fall asleep by the moment you finish your sentence. Or you say, oh, I'm doing a blockchain project. That's very exciting, right? People get very excited because, you know, the word blockchain is exciting, but I think it's exciting because of the things you've seen in the public blockchains. And so there are some other possible breakthroughs in private blockchains, but I think less exciting ones. And then, quite frankly, I mean, public blockchains, if you take away decentralization, which leads to permissionlessness and censorship resistance, they're otherwise not very interesting. I mean, they're kind of worse at everything else. And so the, you know, And it's one of the funny things, and you see this over and over and over again in public commentary about cryptocurrency. Oh, well, look, this other database scales better. Oh, this other thing has this better feature. Oh, this third thing is easier to use. All of those things are true and completely irrelevant, right? And this is kind of what you see in disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies tend to start at being vastly better at something and usually horrible at everything else, right? And so there is a absolutely fantastic Chris Dixon blog post, which I believe was in your reading, that says most major disruptive innovations start off looking like a toy. And what does that mean? Why is it a toy? Why do people... So it's a toy from the perspective of the existing serious providers. They are the folks who have bit by bit built up their product through a bunch of sustaining innovations over decades. And now they have a full suite of useful features for all types of reasons, all types of usage cases, all types of reasons. And this is the enterprise grade product, right? It comes from a very serious vendor. It has a brand, it has a support team. It's been implemented in 50% of the Fortune 500, and so on. And then someone comes up and says, oh, look, I found a replacement for this very fancy thing. And so everyone gets alarmed and goes and looks at the quote-unquote replacement, and it's laughable. Oh, well, look, we have 100 features, and like this thing has 5. 95% of our features, they don't even have them. And by the way, the 5 that it has, 4 of those 5 are poorly designed, and they don't work well, and ours work better. And the whole thing's just very difficult to use, and scary, and risky, and doesn't integrate with these other enterprise systems, and this and that and the next thing and the fifth thing, and all these reasons why this is much worse than the existing system. And all of those reasons are true. But there is one reason that's not true, right? Those 1 out of those 100 things, it is much better at. And that is often enough. Because what will happen is, for that 1 out of 100 that it's much better at, that's where you'll get your initial set of users. That's where you'll get the folks that have specific pain points. And those folks are your innovators, and then your early adopters. And you see this even, here, I'll tell you a funny one. Online desktop applications, right? So like Google Docs or Excel Online or Word Online. What was, like, when Google's spreadsheet product first came online, it was kind of 1,000 times worse than Excel in every single way, except it was much easier to collaborate. And kind of the initial usage case for it was much easier to make a list that you are sharing with other people. So if like the 4 of us wanted to make a list of what things we needed for the party and who was buying the beers and who was buying the Doritos and who was going to get the lemons, doing it in an online spreadsheet that is otherwise 1,000 times worse than Excel in every single way. It doesn't do pivot tables. It doesn't do macros. It doesn't run complicated scenarios. It's slower. It's horrible. Except it's actually better for making that list. Because otherwise you'd have to make it, then you'd have to email it around, and someone would have to come in and say, oh, but we're now unsynced because I made a change and you made a change, and so on and so on. So this is this is such an important framework by which to look at things. Now, it doesn't mean that every single thing that's good at one thing and bad at other things is going to be a interesting concept, right? So you still need some judgment. Some things you might be good at something, and that thing really nobody cares about. But a general rule is, here are some general rules of thumb. In a new invention, it is better for it to be absolutely loved by 1% of the potential population and hated by everyone else than for everyone to be lukewarm about it. If everyone thinks, if all 100% of people think your new thing is pretty good, you're probably doomed, which is weird. It's counterintuitive because the feedback you're going to get will mislead you. You launched a new thing. You show it to someone, your friends, your colleagues, your family. They say, oh, yeah, no, that's nice. Oh, I like it. I like your new Gijima thing. That's great. Yeah, no, I'd love to use it. No, it looks nice. Yeah, no, it's really nice. You're dead. Because that is not enough to actually get people to switch from whatever it is they're using. The rule of thumb in Silicon Valley is something has to be 10 times better than the alternative for it to start catching on. And if it is 10 times better at something, it can kind of be like infinity times worse at everything else. And here, with, when Bitcoin came out, it was arguably infinity times better at certain things. So if you wanted to send a small transaction from New York to someplace in Nigeria that couldn't get a merchant account quickly, digitally, at a relatively low transaction fee online, there was no other way to do it. It was literally the only way to do it. And so that and that was, again, why could you do it? Because it was permissionless and it was censorship resistant. And so for certain applications, permissionlessness and censorship resistant are infinity times better. It was infinity times better. And so that's interesting because when you see that, that's where you get a core of extremely dedicated users and a bunch of people who think this is the dumbest thing in the world and they hate it and they don't understand why everyone's getting all excited about it. And they sound very serious and very sophisticated. And they have very serious and very sophisticated reasons why this new thing's not going to work. Well, does that remind you of anything you've seen? Right? Like, this is literally the mainstream business press for the whole of Bitcoin's existence is X people who are fanatics and think it's going to change the world and everyone makes fun of them. And then everyone else saying like, well, here are some very sensible reasons why this is never going to work. And so, but that is for a startup, and if you look at Bitcoin as a startup, it's a relevant way to analyze, that is a good setup. That is what you want. That is much better than if people say, oh, yeah, no, Bitcoin's nice. Everyone, oh, yeah, it's really, it's great. Yeah, it's useful. Definitely like to try it someday. That's not enough. That's not enough to get people over the hurdle. Now, one extra twist to this framework that I have in my mind that I use to assess if something that's good at one thing and terrible at a bunch of other things, is that enough not just to get a few upfront motivated users, but from those few that you can get a lot more. And for me, permissionlessness is a big deal because when one of the things that is your upfront feature is permissionlessness, then that means all types of people are going to flow into the space, invent all types of things in that space, and some of those things will end up being the features that are missing from the initial product. And so I pay extra special attention to interesting new ideas that are also permissionless. And this is something that characterized the internet, right? Characterized in some way voice over IP, characterizes in some way cryptocurrency. And then it gets really interesting once it gets going, because bit by bit, people start building out the extra features on top of it, and then that becomes complicated for the incumbents because it's not clear how you react, because they start kind of eating you from below, and at some point they'll still have that one thing that's better than the incumbent, and then bit by bit they cover kind of 80% of what the incumbent does, and then now it's good enough for everyone. The best move for the incumbent is to go disrupt themselves. That is always the right answer. You can argue about timing, you can try and optimize the timing, but there's no question that you should do it. Because eventually, if something's going to happen, it is going to happen. And it's better you disrupting yourself than someone else disrupting you. And you see this in all types of industries, right? Like universities are very resistant to online education. They hated it. And so the universities that did this first tended to be non-elite universities, non-traditional universities, universities not with highly prestigious ground programs. And they said, oh, well, I'll try. There's a way to differentiate myself. And then eventually people said, oh, wow, this online education thing's kind of interesting. And eventually everyone else started doing it. In the example I mentioned earlier of online Office applications, well, Microsoft, to their credit, ultimately went and built pretty nice online Office applications themselves and slowed down the kind of losses and penetration of Google Docs. Because if they had not, it would eventually have been a big problem for them. So they kind of danced around a little bit at the beginning, but then actually went all in and said, no, we're going to, sure, continue to offer our desktop apps for the power users, but we're also going to offer the online version. And so we are not going to let Google just walk right into that space unopposed. And that's the right answer. If you're an incumbent and you see a challenger, a disruptor in your industry starting to gain traction, you generally need to also participate in that space. And it's hard because all your instincts are going to be against it. You say, well, oh my God, I mean, because usually you can't charge the same amount of money for the new thing as you can for the old thing, right? And that's where people start getting alarmed. They say, oh, but we're used to selling our X at $500, and this thing's like $5 a month. It's going to be so much worse. If it is something that is meeting a customer need, eventually the customers are going to go to it and start actually, you will lose them from the $500 thing, and then you won't get them on the annuity alternative anyway, and your competitor will get them. So, and then it gets interesting, right? Because there's organizational issues. I'll tell you what I think is best practice. You can't have the same team that's running the existing thing running the new thing. Their processes, their systems, their budgets, their targets, their way of operation are going to be all inappropriate for the new thing. They're only going to be appropriate for the old thing, and they'll be in constant clash with each other. And so best practice is you have to have another team. And what that means, I mean, You could maybe go invest in a startup or buy a startup, or even if you're doing it internally, you kind of have to create an internal startup, an internal unit, and say, okay, you folks over in a different part of the organization, you're going to have the resources to compete in this manner. You do not report to the guys running the old version of the system. You can, in fact, compete in any way you think that's appropriate. You don't have to try and match, be consistent with our strategy over here. You can use different pricing, you can use different approaches, you can do whatever you like, and go off and do the best you can. And it is hard. I don't know. To some of you, it might not sound hard, but when you are a manager and you have a system working, you're a successful company, right? Like the incumbents are successful companies. They sometimes look very silly in retrospect, but that's because this is just a very hard topic to manage. There wouldn't be the incumbents if they weren't at some point very successful startups and challengers, and then very competent. And by the time they're incumbents, they're usually fine-tuned machines and everything's working great. And now you're saying, oh, well, let's go do a bunch of things that kind of violate all your instincts about what's the right way to compete in this industry. And it's difficult. And so best practice is something like what I described. And once in a while it's done correctly and it's impressive, and a lot of times it's just not done at all. And people miss the boat. I'll leave you one last one on this topic. One that I am sure every single one of you has in your pockets right now, which is a phone without a keyboard. This was an utterly revolutionary idea when Steve Jobs launched it, right? And what's a phone without a keyboard? Well, much worse initially at the thing you used phones for, which was sending text messages, or if you had a BlackBerry, if you're like me, you're a BlackBerry addict and you had gotten really fast at typing on a BlackBerry. And you get this non-keyboard phone, and all of a sudden, you're like 5 times slower, and you're like, oh God, no, this is horrible. Like, this is much worse. Like, I can't switch to this thing. But that flat screen actually opened up a whole bunch of other areas where it was much better, even though it was much worse at the thing that was the serious thing that everyone used phones for. And you go read the press releases and the interviews of the incumbents then, and they're hilarious in retrospect. Oh, it's not going to work. Blah, 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 blah. Well, it turns out being good at the generic screen thing was much more important than having a physical keyboard. And there, all the half-baked answers basically failed. So first, the answer of, I'm just going to ignore this at all, definitely failed. But then there's a lot of half-baked answers. Well, we're going to have, I know what we'll do. We'll have a slide-out keyboard and a screen and have these hybrid type of phones. You get the best of both worlds. None of them work either, right? Like now, pretty much every single phone on the planet has no physical keyboard, and the full screen has one, and eventually predictive typing got better, and so on and so on. And you got to acceptable on typing and much better on everything else, and it conquered the world in a decade or so, which is, I mean, fascinating, right? That's something that every single individual one of us has lived. And it destroyed Nokia's consumer business, which was a super powerhouse business. I mean, the year before, it was like, could anyone catch Nokia in handsets? And, you know, a few years later, Nokia is effectively not in the handset business, right? Same with BlackBerry. Don't worry about Nokia. They have an excellent B2B business on the network side, so they're okay. But it is remarkable how fast that shift happened. Okay. Is there an estimate of the current percent of people using BTC and cryptocurrencies? We covered that earlier. I think it's around 3%, plus or minus some pretty big amount. Could we say Bitcoin is an invention and all new features are innovation? Is Bitcoin only an innovation, and actual inventions are cryptography, the internet, hashing functions, and so on? Well, on the second note, I think Bitcoin is an invention. It uses a bunch of other inventions, but I do not think it is an innovation on top of it, because it is bringing together a lot of different things, to actually make it work. Now, is Bitcoin innovation all new feature, an invention, all new features, innovation? Certainly, adaptations, new features launched on top of Bitcoin itself are for sure just innovations, not inventions. A lot of the pretty basic altcoins, I think, are innovations, not inventions. I do think some of the other public blockchains might be sufficiently distinct to be thought of as inventions of their own. Where that line is, hard to say. Litecoin is certainly not an invention. Is IPFS? Is Ethereum? Interesting questions. These are philosophical questions with no wrong or right answer. It's interesting where one would draw that line. If an innovation has to create and return value, how can it not be a product? Or are products and services different things in this point of view? May value mean other things than monetary value? Yes, all of the above. I gave a speech last night on a different topic, and I discussed encyclopedias. And when I was growing up, if you were, let's say, upper middle class, this is probably where this was most intense, getting an Encyclopedia Britannica was a big deal. You know, your kids are hitting, I don't know, 10, 11, 12. Encyclopedia Britannica then was, I don't know, $1,300. So it's probably, I don't know, $3,000 in today's dollars. It took up half a bookshelf. It was both an important part for your education, because it had a lot of interesting facts and figures in there, and also a status signifier, right? Like something that, oh, look at us, we are so very much upper middle class and so very much interested in our children's education, and that there is like a whole encyclopedia of knowledge on their own bookshelf, right? So it's a combination. It's like, it is a practical thing. Yes, you could look things up at home instead of going to the library, and so maybe you do a little bit more studying, but it's also, I think, it was a cultural signifier. We take education seriously. We are willing to put real money down. We're willing to deny ourselves other things in order to have knowledge right here in our own house. And there is no way you would look at that and think that this is something that would ever be widespread, and it's expensive. Well, obviously today, Wikipedia is vastly broader and more capable than Encyclopedia Britannica ever was. And it is available to every man, woman, and child on the internet around the world in multiple languages and for free. So, to answer the question, may value mean other things than monetary value? Absolutely, right? Like, has Wikipedia returned value to people, even if it is not charged? An almost uncountable amount of value, right? What it has done for broadening human knowledge and disseminating human knowledge is remarkable. It's one of the greatest gifts to humanity that anyone has ever invented, even though you can't necessarily put a dollar price on it. So returning value does not just mean, hey, I'm selling you a widget and you're giving money to me for that widget. There's all types of other ways to do that, right? Like many of the vaccines in the middle of the 20th century were released for free by their inventors. They thought that it was an important public service to do that. They viewed themselves as scientists and public health professionals, not as pharmaceutical company executives. So they did not patent their vaccines. They released them freely and so that the world would use them. And there you had ultimately tens, if not hundreds of millions of people who did not die because of those vaccines, or who were not paralyzed or injured or sick because of those vaccines. The monetary value of that is incalculable. The human value of that, incalculable, tremendous. So I think it is absolutely fair to say that we should not think, yes, it can be a product or a service, but it can also be something that is not denominated in currency terms, right? People can invent something of value that returns back value to humanity and not necessarily get paid for it. And in many ways, those are some of the most admirable people, right? Some of the people that we're most indebted to, even if they didn't convert it to billions of dollars for themselves and their personal lifestyle. Last question in this set. What, and I'm going to give you a heads up, I actually don't know the answer to this question. Not sure how I can answer this. What role is crypto economics playing in digital currency / ICO innovation? I don't exactly know how to answer it. First of all, I'm not convinced that crypto economics is different than economics. So that's a whole chapter of debate. But arguably, a lot of crypto economics is just re-implementing or reinventing a lot of kind of existing economics or existing theories in economics, different theories of economics, just in a different format. And so I'm not sure what role it plays in innovation. I think maybe a way to think about it is the other way around. To the degree that we have digital currencies and permissionless currencies, it allows us to run fast and large tests of economic theories implemented digitally. And so maybe you can think of that question reversed, as maybe cryptocurrencies allow us to test economic theories at scale and in parallel. And that might be an interesting way to look at it. Okay, that is all I had on people's existing questions. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and I think we're okay. I don't see any too relevant questions there. I do see a lot of chatting about the quiz and the final, and so by all means, feel free to ask us questions here, ask us questions in the learning management system, hit people up on Twitter to make sure you know everything that you need to know. I strongly encourage you to take the final test. We have some of the highest completion rates of any MOOC, and that is because people are motivated and take the final test, and it gives you something that you can then use for the rest of your life. I cannot tell you how many people I have met at blockchain conferences that say, yes, I completed the course, I have my certificate, it is written into the blockchain for eternity. You are still in one of the first classes ever taught on this topic ever. And if at any point in the future you then decide that you want to either do one of the professional certificates or do the master's program, then it is necessary that you had completed the quiz, so the final exam. So you need to take it. That's my suggestion is that you take it if in any way you can. And you've gotten to here. You're in the second to last session. You're doing very well. So please go through to the end. We have one more session on the 7th of May, Monday. And so that was our last live session. And other than that, I think we're done for today. Thank you all. I look forward to seeing you in the last session, and definitely start studying for the final exam. Thank you, everyone.